Class, and thank you for attending your lecture. So our topic today would be your leukocytes, also known as your WBC. Now, your leukocytes class has amoeboid motility, and then they are able to escape or move from tissue to circulating blood. Ms. Garcines, are you there? Ms. Garcines? Hindi kita marinig. Wala kang ano. Naka-USB naman. Okay, si Miss Coria na lang. Miss Coria, are you there?
Sir,
What do you call the movement of the WBCs from the tissue to circulating blood?
diapedesis po, sir.
Okay, sinagot na rin ni Ms. Garcines. So it's your diapedesis. So your leukocytes are able to perform diapedesis, which is the movement of tissues to circulating blood. Now, your leukocytes are lighter than RBC and tend to accumulate at the periphery of flowing blood, adjacent to the lining cell of the blood vessel. So imagine this would be your blood vessel class. They are usually found in this location. Nandito sila class sa periphery, sa gilid ng inyong blood vessels. Now, Ms. Abison, are you there?
Yes, sir.
What do you think is the reason bakit sila nag-accumulate dyan sa gilid ng blood vessels?
Saan
Bakit
po,
hindi
sir?
sa gitna? Bakit kailangan sa periphery? Ano tingin mo?
Kasi baka ano na, sir, denaturate na yung cell, sir.
Ano ba purpose ng WBC mo? If you recall, what's the purpose of your WBC, Ms. Abison?
To fight, ano, sir, para sa fight infection po, sir.
So how would they be effective in fighting infection? Saan dapat sila makita if you want them to be effective in fighting infections?
Sa ano po, sir? Sa site of infection, sir, sa periphery po.
Okay, so 'di ba, let's say that you have a wound, nasugatan ka. Your blood vessel would be open. Now, when that is open, it would be susceptible. When I say susceptible, madaling pasukin ng bacteria. Your bacteria would enter here. That is why, class, your WBCs would be found in the periphery because they would be the first one to fight off those bacteria and microorganisms. Now, they can be found in all body fluids such as your sweat, synovia, pancreatic juices, feces, urine, and secretions from the genital tract. Ms. Geronimo, are you there?
Hello, sir.
What is the most common type of WBC you could find in your urine?
Urine, sir.
Anong type of WBC would you commonly what type of WBC can you found commonly in your urine?
EO, sir.
All right, it's your eosinophils. They are usually found in your GIT. GUT. Then it requires folic acid for normal maturation. So remember, your folic acid will be responsible for your nuclear maturation. And your WBCs have nucleus. So thus, they would require folic acid for normal maturation. All right. Types of WBCs and their compositions. We have your granulocytes. Now, your granulocytes would process glucose by aerobic glycolysis, producing lactic acid. Increased lactic acid in infections and this decrease in leukemia. That is why, class, sa clinical chemistry nyo, lactic acid is an indicator of infections. Kapag mataas ang lactic acid nyo, if your lactic acid is increased, you would have increased, if your lactic acid increase, you have increased infection in the body. Then increased acid phosphatase in leukemia and normal in infections. Phospholipids, lysozyme, and phagocytin are bactericidal components present. Now, itong lysozyme and phagocytin class, these two are responsible in helping in your phagocytosis, which is known as your cell eating. Again, your granulocytes process glucose by aerobic glycolysis. Kapag tinanong kayo, how do your WBCs process glucose? It is via aerobic glycolysis. There is increased lactic acid, which is an indicator of infection. Increased acid phosphatase in leukemia and normal in infection. So kapag meron kayong leukemia class, if a person has leukemia, decrease ang lactic acid, increase ang acid phosphatase, also known as your ACP. Kapag naman meron kayong infection, if you have an infection, you have increased lactic acid while you have normal ACP. Again, in leukemia, you have decreased lactic acid and decreased ACP. In infection, you have increased lactic acid and normal ACP. Now, we also have your lymphocytes. Now, your lymphocytes are composed of glycogen and acid phosphatase. They would also contain alkaline phosphatase, also known as your ALP, dipeptidase, oxidase, and your peroxidase. Now, this peroxidase class is also responsible for killing bacteria and other foreign substances. So they contain ALP, dipeptidase, oxidase, and peroxidase. Then we also have your monocytes. Now, in monocytes class, lysosomes are more abundant than in granulocytes. Now, class, an example would be if in cases wherein your neutrophil encountered a very resistant bacteria. When I say resistant bacteria, hindi nila mapatay. They are unable to phagocyte. They are unable to phagocyte. Now, when that happens, class, if they are unable to phagocyte the said organism, they would call on the monocytes. Now, the monocytes, due to having more lysosomes, are able to kill the more resistant bacteria. In simpler terms, class, yung monocyte nyo is like your SWAT sa police. They are the special forces. Pag merong hindi makaya ang normal na police, they would call, which is your neutrophil, they would call on the monocytes. Now, your monocytes class have glycogen, sudanophilic substances, lysozyme, acid phosphatase, phospholipid, and lipids are present. Now, itong sudanophilic nyo class, do remember whenever you would encounter the word Sudan, this would usually refer to your lipids. And an example of the word Sudan would be found in your stains. Sa mga stains class, if you recall sa histopath nyo, merong mga Sudan black, Sudan red, mga ganun. So those are stains for fats and lipids. Then we also have your plasma cells. Now, your plasma cells are usually derived from your lymphocyte who became B cells, and the B cells would then produce your plasma cell or your plasmacyte. Now, they would contain large amount of RNA and DNA and are responsible for manufacturing antibodies. Now, let's look at the lifespan of WBCs. Your granulocytes class have 2 to 3 hours lifespan during serious tissue infection. So when you say serious tissue infection class, this usually involves infestations. An example would be your Trichinella spiralis. In Trichinella spiralis class, the cysts would infiltrate the tissue, specifically yung thigh tissue nyo. And in that case, your granulocytes would have shorter lifespan kasi hindi nila kagad mapatay, and they would also be destroyed along. Now, on average when they are normal to class, normally found in the tissues, they have a 14-hour lifespan. Then when they are not needed in the tissue, they could live for as long as several days. Now, your monocytes, unknown ang lifespan nila because they would always wander back and forth between tissues and the blood. So they would often change. Nagbabago sila class. If they would be found in the tissues, they would have their corresponding name. So kung nasa lungs sila, they would be known as alveolar macrophage. Copper cells, depending on the organ or the tissue they would be found. Now, due to that, wandering back and forth sa circulation and the tissue, unknown ang kanilang lifespan. Then for the lymphocytes, they usually last a few hours in the blood. But for your T lymphocytes, they have a lifespan of 100 to 200 days. Now, the properties of leukocytes. Number one would be your diapedesis, which is the movement of WBC where it can squeeze through the tissue. That is why, class, yung WBC nyo is very flexible when there is an infection. They would often move from the tissue and to the circulating peripheral blood. Then they have a amoeboid motion. This is a unidirectional movement to the tissues. And one of the best capability of your WBCs is your chemotaxis, which is the ability of the WBC to move towards or away from the source of chemical substances. Now, itong chemical substances na to, class, these are known as your chemotaxin. And if you recall, yung chemotaxin nyo are the substances that would stimulate WBCs. And they would often cause, chemotaxins could be bacteria, could be chemicals, could be etc. Now, bacterial toxins could cause your chemotaxis. So if your WBCs could detect a bacteria, your bacteria can produce your chemotaxis. Lalapit sila dun. They would move toward the organism. Now, there are two types of chemotaxis. We have the positive and the negative. Now, your positive is wherein the WBC are attracted to the source. Now, this would happen if there is an infection. Now, a negative chemotaxis is wherein WBC are repelled from the source of the chemical. Now, in this case, class, they are unable to kill the organism, the microorganism. Now, another wonderful property of your WBCs is your phagocytosis, which is your ingestion of particular matter by the cells. Now, this would depend on the following: the negative charge particles that repel phagocytes and the presence of opsonins. Does anyone know what opsonin is based on your immunology and serology class?
Try lang, sir. Speeds up phagocytosis.
Ano, Mr. Columns? Wait, ulit.
It speeds up the process of phagocytosis.
Okay, so these are substances that, very good, that enhances phagocytosis. So an example would be class is yung, if I recall, would be your complement. And in the complement class, we have what you call yung C3, C3b to be exact, which would enhance phagocytosis. Okay, let's go to your granule contents. We have your primary granules. So like, as most of you know, yung mga neutrophils nyo, specifically yung granulocytes. Sa granulocytes class, they have granules. Now, they have different types of granules. The first one would be your primary granules. Now, in primary granules class, they would appear in their pro-myelocytic stage. Now, they are membrane-bound lysosomes which contain acid hydrolase that digests phagocytized bacteria. So your primary granules class, these are granules attached to lysosomes. And since they are attached to lysosomes, if you recall, ang lysosome class would produce the enzyme lysozyme. And si lysozyme would digest foreign matter. Again, your primary granules are found in the pro-myelocytic stage. They will start appearing at that stage. They are usually attached to lysosomes, which will produce the enzyme lysozyme that would digest the foreign matter. An example of your foreign matter is your bacteria, wherein it would be ingested and it would be digested using the primary granules. Now, your primary granules class would contain myeloperoxidase, lysozyme, proteases, and bacterial cationic proteins that are responsible for positive peroxidase reaction. Now, your peroxidase reaction class is responsible for your bacterial killing. Now, we have a so-called metabolic or respiratory burst. Now, oxygen, imagine this would be oxygen. It, with the help of your NADPH, also known as your oxidase, it will now form into superoxide. Now, si superoxide nyo class, magiging hydrogen peroxide nyo, which would combine with your myeloperoxidase. And when that happens, class, it would kill the bacteria. Yan yung tinatawag nilang positive peroxidase reaction. So oxygen, with the action of NADPH or oxidase, would form superoxide. Now, superoxide class would then become hydrogen peroxide, which would now combine with myeloperoxidase, causing your bacteria to be killed. This process class is known as your metabolic or respiratory burst. Do remember that. Okay. The second one would be your secondary granules. Now, your primary granules would appear in the myelocytic stage. Your secondary granules naman would appear in the myelocytic stage. Now, they would also contain lysozyme, lactoferrin, collagenase, and vitamin B12. There is no peroxidase. So they are not responsible for killing your bacteria. Now, lactoferrin is your iron-binding glycoprotein that competes with bacteria for iron inhibiting group. Now, it promotes adherence of neutrophils to endothelial cells. So, sa secondary granules nyo class, they have your lactoferrin. Now, yung lactoferrin nyo class would compete, makikipag-agawan yan sa bacteria for iron. And when that happens, class, bacterial growth is inhibited. And when that happens, when bacterial growth is inhibited, it would promote adherence of neutrophils to your endothelial cell. Another type of granule would be your tertiary granules. So we have your primary for killing the bacteria. Your secondary would be seen in the myelocytic stage, not responsible for killing bacteria. Now, your tertiary granules are less dense than secondary granules. Appears during the late myelocytic. So we have your primary in the pro-myelocytic. Your secondary in the early myelocytic. And your tertiary seen in the late myelocytic stage. Now, your right angle scatter in a laser-based cell counting system is used to measure cytoplasmic granularity. So let's say class, you want to know, gusto nyo malaman yung amount of granules and type of granules for each bacteria. Sino ba yung mas madami? Yung primary, yung secondary, or yung tertiary? When you want to know that, you would be using a right angle scatter in a laser-based cell counting system. Again, if you want to know the amount of granules and the type of granules present sa WBC, you would be using a laser-based cell counting system in a right angle scatter. This is a type of scattergram. Ituturo ko to sa inyo sa laboratory sa automation. So a laser-based cell counting system is used in the measurement of the amount of granules and their type. Time is it 3 minutes ba? Okay. Functions of WBC, we have your neutrophils, which is responsible for chemotaxis and phagocytosis. It would secrete lysozyme and pyrogen. Eosinophils naman would be responsible for chemotaxis as well as phagocytosis. It is anti-inflammatory, would secrete histamine, prevents basophil and mast cell degranulation. Defense against helminthic parasite and would secrete plasminogen. And your plasminogen class would induce the production of your plasma cell or the conversion into plasma cell. Basophils, responsible also for chemotaxis and phagocytosis, responsible for immediate hypersensitivity reactions. So they have receptors for IgE. They can also be responsible for delayed hypersensitivity reaction. Synthesis of histamine, anaphylaxis, and platelet aggregation factor. So immediate hypersensitivity and delayed hypersensitivity. Sino pa ba? Si Miss Abaga, andyan ba? Sheena, andyan ka? Miss Colpera, Miss K, Blanche, are you there?
Sir,
Can you give me an example of immediate hypersensitivity reaction? In your immediate hypersensitivity, can you give me an example?
allergy, sir.
Okay, allergy. What do you call that specific allergy? Di ba may mga types tayo ng allergy? So you have your skin allergy as an example. In your skin allergy, you would have um, wales, flarings. Yung mag-flare up yung skin niya. How about for delayed blockage of airway? Yes, but blockage of airway is one. How about for delayed hypersensitivity class? Who can give me an example of your delayed hypersensitivity? Delayed siya. Anyone? Delayed hypersensitivity. So an example would be your graft versus host disease. Graft versus host disease. The poison, inflammation, irritation. No, more on immediate yan. For pag delayed kasi class, hindi siya immediate. So you one type would be your graft versus host disease. Pwede din yung ano man tawag dun sa pagkain eh. Pag kumain ka ng hipon, magugulat ka na lang na ano. Forgot the right term. Poison ivy, yes, pwede. Tuberculin skin test, pwede din. Okay. So let's proceed now to your monocytes. Now, they are also responsible for chemotaxis. So, na-notice nyo class, karamihan ng WBC nyo could perform chemotaxis and even phagocytosis. Now, your monocytes would secrete transferrin, interferon, lysozyme, and pyrinogen. Class, interferon, have you heard of this word sa sero nyo, immunology nyo? What does the word interferon mean? What type of organism would cause the production of your interferon? Is it your bacteria? Is it your fungi? Is it your virus?
Virus, sir.
All right. They are usually seen in viruses. So these are substances class that are produced in the presence of viruses. And there also, these monocytes can also produce lysozyme and pyrogen. Now, they would act as feeder cells, supplying iron to young RBC during erythropoiesis. Integral in cellular and humoral immunity. And can remove senescent cells. So senescent are dying cells. Dying or old cells. And are responsible for antigen presentation. So usually class naman ng antigen nyo are viruses. So they could be also be used in your identifying viruses, humanocytes. Then we have your lymphocytes. We have your two types, yung T cell and your B cell. Now, your T cells class are cell-mediated immunity. So when you say cell-mediated, this would usually involve your WBCs. Responsible for delayed hypersensitivity such as graft rejection, GVH disease, and defense against neoplasm. So when you say neoplasm class, these are related to your tumors. While your B cells responsible for humoral immunity. And when you say immumoral, this would involve your immunoglobulins. Produces antibodies after transforming into plasma cell. They would also act as a feeder cell in the synthesis of proteins, enzymes, minerals, and transports them to sites for cellular growth. Seen in chronic inflammatory processes and immunologic memory. And when you say immunologic memory, once exposed to a virus before, they would remember the characteristics of that virus, and they would be able to produce antibodies against it again. So very important tong immunologic memory class. This is the same as the action of your vaccines, wherein once you've gotten infected before, they would remember the characteristics of that virus na nag-infect sa'yo before. And once you get reinfected again, pag na-reinfect ka, they can be able to produce antibodies against it. Then you also have your plasma cell, which is your antibody formation and secretion, part of the antigen-antibody quartet. So do remember this for lympho, AO, mono, and your plasma cells. Lympho, AO, mono, and plasma cells, your LEMP. These are the antigen-antibody quartet. They are responsible for your antigen-antibody defense system. LEMP. Now, let's go now to your non-malignant hereditary disorders of WBC. Now, maraming categories to class. These are too many. I tried to simplify them, but now the first one would be the inherited abnormalities of your granulocytes. The first one would be those involving the nucleus. The first one would be your Pelger-Hewitt anomaly. In your Pelger-Hewitt anomaly, you have hereditary hyposegmentation. So instead of having 2 to 5 lobes class, you would have less than 2 lobes. Pwedeng isa lang yan. Now, there is the failure of the nucleus of the neutrophil to segment. So that is the reason, class, why there is hyposegmentation. The nucleus wasn't able to segment properly. They would appear bilobe, can be differentiated from stub due to its coarse chromatin. And then we also have your Andritz anomaly, which is hereditary hypersegmentation. Now, in Andritz anomaly class, there is greater than 5 lobes. There's also hereditary giant neutrophil leukocytes, characterized also by hyperlobulation. Davidson anomaly, increase of binucleated neutrophils. So you would be able to see binucleated neutrophils in Davidson anomaly. Increase yung ganyang makikita nyo cells. Then we have your Seman anomaly, increased number of nuclear appendages in the neutrophil. So let me show that to you, class. So this is your nuclear appendages. So para silang Para silang class, maliit na protrusion. A small protrusion from the small protrusion from the lobe. Ito sila. And this is characterized by your Seman anomaly. Then we also have your Pelgert-Hewitt anomaly, or hyposegmentation. And we also have your Andritz, which is characterized by your hypersegmentation. So if you notice here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 lobes. Hypersegmentation. Sa Seaman anomaly class, makakakita kayo ng maraming nuclear appendages or protrusions from the lobe. Sa Pelgert-Hewitt, there is hyposegmentation. In Andritz anomaly, there is hypersegmentation greater than 5 lobes. So do remember these three. All right, so after the nucleus class of inherited abnormalities, let's go to your cytoplasm. Now, in the cytoplasm class, we have your May-Heglin anomaly. Your May-Heglin anomaly class is characterized by the presence of gray-blue inclusions that are more prominent than dull bodies. So you could misidentify this with dull bodies class. But they are more prominent. Mas malalaki sila, mas brightly stained sila compared to your dull bodies. And they are resulting from the structural RNA alteration. Another one would be your Alder-Riley anomaly. Now, your Alder-Riley is characterized by large azurophilic granules. They would resemble very toxic, severe toxic granules related with abnormal storage of mucopolysaccharides. And then we also have your Jordan's anomaly, abundant vacuoles, which are Sudanophilic inclusions. So Sudan is related to your fats. Mamaya I'll show you a picture of this. Then we also have your Allius greenashi anomaly, which is the hereditary depletion of peroxidase in neutrophils and monocytes. Miss Sarah Hussein, are you there? Sarah. Sige, sige. Okay lang. Si Miss Ahmad na lang. Miss Ahmad, are you there? Sira din mic. Si Miss Barcelona. Toby, are you there?
Po, sir.
Dito sa Allius greenashi mo, there is hereditary depletion of peroxidase. Now, if there is that depletion of peroxidase, Miss Barcelona, what happens to your WBC? Kapag meron kang depletion of peroxidase, what happens to your WBC? Ano ba ulit ginagawa ng peroxidase class? Yung sinabi ko kanina. What does your peroxidase do?
Mag-shrink, sir?
Hindi siya mag-shrink. Okay, Miss Garcines, what does your peroxidase? Okay, Miss Jeronimo already answered. So if there is depletion of peroxidase class, there will be no bacterial killing. Kapag walang bacterial killing, no phagocytosis will occur. So basically, class, in your Allius greenashi, there is defective neutro and monocyte function. Another one would be your Kessman anomaly or Hitzig anomaly. This is familial neutropenia with hyper gamma globulinemia. Now, familial neutropenia, when you say familial class, this is hereditary. Now, hereditary siya wherein it is characterized by low neutrophils, increase gamma globulins, also known as your antibodies. Increase antibodies. Okay. Here's an example class of your May-Heglin anomaly. Now, if you would notice class yung mga granules doon sa cytoplasm nila are more prominent. And this one would be your Alder-Riley anomaly. And this would be your Jordan's anomaly class. These are the vacuoles. Itong mga puting nakikita nyo. These are the vacuoles causing seen in Jordan's anomaly. Prominent tendole bodies. Tendole bodies. Almost similar to your toxic granules. Then they have large azurophilic granules. So yun yung mga granules ng class, very prominent. And your Jordan's anomaly has a presence of your vacuoles. All right. Let's go now to your abnormalities. So kanina class inherited abnormalities naman. Now let's go to your abnormalities of granulocyte function. So we're talking about this time function naman. First one would be your Jobs syndrome. Now this is the random movement of phagocytes. Normal but directional motility is impaired. So sa Jobs syndrome class, ang may problema naman is yung movement niya. So directional motility is impaired. So kanina sabi ko unidirectional siya. In Jobs syndrome, may problem yung movement niya. Your WBCs would respond slow. And then we also have your lazy leukocyte syndrome. So both random and directed movement of the cells are defective. So do remember, kapag Jobs syndrome class, impaired ang directional motility. Sa lazy leukocyte, both random and directed movement are defective. Sa Jobs syndrome, yung directed lang yung may problema. Sa lazy leukocyte, both random and directed ang problem.